Okay, good morning. It's still morning, everybody. A couple of things. First of all, I'd like to announce, and we should announce each week, that our shiur is sponsored for the year by Dr. and Mrs. Menachem Marcus. Thank you. Dr. and Mrs. Menachem Marcus, in loving memory of their aunts Hilda Meyer and Irma Haas. So I thank you for helping me remember. My mind blanked for just a moment. Okay, we are about to enter into what has to be one of the most difficult and mysterious episodes in the Torah. And that is the episode of the pre-Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, the fruit of the forbidden tree, the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. First, we look at the context. Look at the two psukim before you. Vayatzmach Hashem Elokim min ha'adamah kol eitz nechmod l'mareh v'tov l'ma'achal ve'etz hachayim b'toch hagan ve'etz hadas tov v'ra. God created this garden and caused to bloom within it all sorts of beautiful trees, all sorts of beautiful plants, beautiful to behold and beautiful and beautiful to eat, good to eat. But in this garden, he also planted two unique trees, Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra and Eitz Hachayim, the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Then the Torah goes on to say, Vayitzav Hashem Elokim al ha'adam le'mor, Mikol Eitz Hagan achol tochel. God commanded the man to say, and by the way, we're still calling him Ha-Adam instead of Adam. It's interesting, later on it'll be Adam, now it's the man. God commanded the man to say, and perhaps we'll explain that a little bit later, Mikol Eitz Hagan achol tochel, you shall certainly eat from all the trees of the garden. Everything's available to you. But me'etz hadas tov v'ra lo tochal mimenu ki biyom acholchem mimenu mos tamus. But from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall certainly not eat, because if you do, you will certainly die. Stop there. Before we go on and try to delve into the problems with this story, we need to talk for a moment or two about three forces that weave together, and these three forces govern not only man's life but his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The three forces are prescience, predestination, and free will. Prescience, God's knowledge, prescience.
God's knowledge?
You see it there? Pre-science. Prescience. Right? It's written down there. Predestination and free will. Prescience means God's knowledge or foreknowledge of what is about to happen. His ability to know what is going to happen before it happens. Free will and predestination. Which of these three forces do we believe in? It's a trick question. We believe in all three. All three. All right? That's right. It's a trick question. All right. We believe in all three. Let's try to understand. Free will is fundamental to Jewish law. Fundamental to our belief. God creates man uniquely with the ability to choose. Without free will, you can't be held culpable for what you do. You can't be rewarded for what you do. Obviously, free will is an essential component of our belief in our relationship with God.
I think if I were there, I would first have eaten the other tree so that I could live forever, and then I would eat that.
All right, that's an interesting comment. All right, her comment was that if she was there, she would have eaten from the tree of life first, and then from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. All right, let's hold that. I don't have a great answer for you, but let's hold that for a little while. Yeah, what's your answer?
had eaten of the tree of life first, it might have told you not to eat from the other tree.
Right, if you'd eaten from the tree of life first, it might have told you not to eat from the other tree. All right, we'll talk about it.
Baruch Hu basically says it, trumps the Eitz Chaim by saying most Thomas. So if you think you're going to get away with it, you're not. Most Thomas.
Right, unless...
telling you right then and there.
Except when he chases Adam from the garden, it does say, lest he eat from the tree of life. So there seems to be, God is limiting his own options by creating the tree of life and saying if he does eat from the tree of life, then he'll live forever. All right, but let's hold it up. All right, so free will, everybody agrees, is essential to Jewish belief. Prescience. Do we believe that God knows what's going to happen before it happens?
Of course.
Okay, how does that then interface?
There's some
All right.
people that don't.
Okay, the Ralbag is the only classical commentary who says that God chooses not to know what we're going to do. In other words, he limits his foreknowledge. But most authorities, right, most philosophers will say that God knows what's going to happen.
It seems to indicate it doesn't know often, like God regrets.
All right, that's an interesting point. All right, that raises, when we get to that, we'll have to try to deal with God regrets and how do you deal with the fact that things seem to change and God seems to act in response to the change as if he didn't know it would happen. But most philosophers, nonetheless, in spite of those problems that emerge from the text, will say that God knows what's going to happen. He just is reacting to what will happen, and that it's a product of our free will that those things happen. Now, if he knows what I'm going to choose, am I really choosing it? All right? So it's a very difficult question. It's a very difficult question. On a simplistic level, we can answer it. And we'll have to be...
I think we're still choosing out of our will. Every system, every AI, every man-made system, I mean, personally, I'm an engineer. When we design, I'm not going to tell the machine what I'm going to design, but every program, it will recognize what is default and fault, when it stop and stop, I mean, they keep going. God gave us free will.
All right, but if you know...
And then he knew everything what we choose, but it's my choice.
Okay, so you're suggesting that the two of them can coexist.
Yes.
All right, and the answer on a simple level, without getting into all of the details, and you're raising some very good points about the Torah seems to raise some issues about God's foreknowledge. We'll get to that when we get to Noah and God or even now, God responding to something that happens as if it didn't know it would happen. But God seems to know what we're going to do, according to most philosophers. And on a simplistic level, I can put it in these terms. God, if I were to create a time machine and go into the future and see that at 2:00 tomorrow afternoon, you're going to cross the street, and I come back and I don't tell you, even though I know that at 2:00 you're going to cross the street, lahavdil, and I'm not God, even though I know you're going to cross the street, you're still choosing to cross the street at that particular moment. God, by not telling you what you're going to do, does not limit your free choice. Yes?
I just wanted to add that pre-science means that God knows, but he chooses not to interfere so we could have free choice.
That's correct.
And then
That's correct. All right. In other words, he chooses not to interfere in order to allow for our free choice. Now, questions have been raised, very, very serious questions about what does that mean when something happens and God is responding to it as if it seems he didn't know it would happen. We'll have to deal with that. Now, next. Yes. What? There are times he does interfere, and we'll have to deal with those times as well. There are times where he lets us know what's going to happen, or he interferes with what is happening. Yes?
We experience time as linear, but there's a thing that past, present, and future are all happening at the same time, so it could be...
Right, it's very possible that in God's world that time is not linear. We don't understand. We don't know. Okay. Now, what about number 3, predestination? Do we believe in that?
Yes.
On some level, we certainly do. My genes were predetermined. Where I was born was predetermined. When I was born was predetermined. My actions are not, and the rabbis take this philosophical quandary, and they communicate it in what is. Excuse me, I forgot to show off. Forgot to shut it off. Okay. And they communicate it in what is a very pithy, as is always the case, a very beautiful medrash that seems to say something very simple, but is saying something very, very, very complicated. If you take a look at the third paragraph on the page, the Dorish Reb Chanina bar Papa, Oso hamaloch hamamuna al hoheroyon lailo shemo, the angel that is appointed to birth, to pregnancy and birth, is known as Lila. What he does is he takes the small drop and he holds it before God, and he says, Ribono Shalom, Tipozu Mateolel. What's going to happen with this particular life? Gibor Cholosh, Chacham Otipesh. Asher Ani. Is he going to be strong? Is he going to be weak? Is he going to be smart, or is he going to be less smart? Is he going to be Asher, or is he going to be Ani? Is he going to be rich, or is he going to be poor? V'ilu Rasha Otzadik. But whether or not this man is going to be, or woman is going to be a Rasha Otzadik, Lo Ka'amar. As Rabbi Chanino says, Hakol bidei shamayim, chutz miyiras shamayim. Everything. So you see how the rabbis take it and paint this picture, and what are they saying? Everything is predetermined, except
Good and evil.
right? Except your choice between good and evil. Correct. Now that we've asked these, now that we've sort of discussed at very, very surface level these three forces, let's now delve into the story. And let's ask, I listed a number of questions. These are the ones that I believe are the most obvious from the story. If you have additional questions, raise them now and we'll see what we can do with them. Why does God create a forbidden tree? What is the nature of the knowledge contained in the fruit of that tree? And why is it forbidden? Do Adam and Chava possess free will before eating from the tree? Can free will exist without knowledge? If you don't know TORAH, can you have free will? If they lack free will, can Adam and Chava be held culpable for sinning? Right. Next, is this entire event a test? If so, what is its purpose? Isn't God setting Adam Chava up for failure? All right, as I told you, take a child, put the child in a room, fill the room with toys, take a box, put the box in the corner, wrap the box, and say you can touch everything except for that box and walk out of the room. All right? That child is going to go straight for the box, sooner or later. So is this something that God wants to have happen? And if he wants to have it happen, why is that so? Right? So those are the questions that I'm raising concerning the story. Does anyone have any other questions concerning the story? I think those are probably enough. Yes?
My question is about the creation of good and evil to begin with.
Okay.
It brings it back to a lot of currently asked questions, like why did Hashem create this thing and then put it in front? Like why did you put the box?
Why does God create good and evil in the first place? And the question...
You said like the box in the corner. Why are you doing that?
All right. So my answer is we're going to try to take a look at that. We're going to, and if by the end of the class we haven't answered the question, then we'll come back to it.
Oh, really?
Okay, totally. All right, good. Okay, let's start with the question. Yes?
If people didn't have free will, what would be the point in creating the other man?
If people didn't have free will, what would be the point in creating him? Okay, he'd be just like the animals. In other words, following instincts. All right, so let's take a look. Oh, okay, got more questions. Yes, go ahead.
What's the purpose of Eitz HaChayim? If they were over on the mitzvah and they ate from the tree, Hashem doesn't have to say, if I leave them here, they might eat from me. Hashem just takes them and takes them out of Gan Eden.
Okay.
Lest they eat from the tree of life.
All right, so that is a question that I'm going to leave for the end because it happens at the end. Okay? And remind me if I don't discuss it before we go. Yes.
And why does
And repeating the question for the audience on tape, the question was, why does God limit his own ability, it would seem, by creating the Eitz HaChayim and say later on, maybe a man will eat from the tree of life, I should get him out of the garden, when in reality he should control it and just say he'll die, right? Okay, let's yes.
And why threaten to kill them and not kill them?
And why threaten to kill him and not kill them? Okay, that's another question. All right, good.
I just want to add in one. What he put at the very beginning, all this test, all of this drama story was the Hashem's original intention of the creation.
All right, why is this test here? Why is it here? All right.
If it was his original
If
intention.
its original intention was otherwise. Okay, so let's try piecemeal to start answering some of these very, very serious questions that we're raising about a very, very strange story. Let's take a look at the divide between 4 different commentaries, 2 and 2. The Abravanel, Don Yitzchak Abravanel, who lived from the 1437 to 1580, primarily known for his life in Spain and having become very, very prominent in the Spanish community. He holds the following: free will exists before eating from the tree. Kilo, and this actually mirrors what someone said, that if without free will, you wouldn't, what would be the sense of creating man? He says, Kilo tipol hatzava el olami sheyesh lo b'chira v'ratzon. God wouldn't command someone to do something unless that person had the choice whether or not to do it. All right? Elo shoemes bazeh, mash hizkarti, what I brought up before. Shehoya eitz hadas hoya ma'orer umar behatava hamiskal. Basically, he says, don't think the tree of knowledge of good and evil gives birth to free will. Free will precedes the tree. What then is the nature of the tree of knowledge of good and evil if it's not to create choice or free will? He says it represents a certain kind of das. And that das is, that knowledge is the desire for material gain. Right? He said that before eating from the tree, man was totally focused on spiritual needs or spiritual goals. The eating of the tree causes man to become consumed on some level with material gain. And therefore, the tree represents that kind of knowledge. Now, I'm going to hold on questions for a little while and just to be able to get through these commentaries. Agreeing with the Abravanel is the Malbim, Meir Leib and Yechiel Michael, who lived from 1809 to 1879. And Poland, Romania, Russia, was chief rabbi of Romania for a while. So he's much later. He has a very interesting take. He says, and it fits in with the Abravanel's position. He says, what happens once they eat from the tree? What's the first thing they notice? That they're naked, and they put on clothes. Says the Malbim, before eating from the tree, nefesh and guf were intermingled. One's soul and one's physical being, and the guf served as the clothing for the nefesh. You didn't need clothes because the guf, the body itself, was clothing. It primarily was the housing for the soul. What happens afterwards Va'ato, I'm looking at the last line, next to last line of his statement. Va'ato al yedei achet shenimzag haguf im hanefesh v'hayu echad. Wait, I take it back. All right, I misstated the Malbim. In the beginning, he says, the guf and the nefesh were separate. You could move one from the other. And therefore the guf, the body, was the clothing for the soul. All right? They were two separate entities. Once eating from the tree, they became molded and melded. And at that point, what happens is you have to have clothing. That's why they respond. But what is he saying again? Is he saying he agrees with the Abravanel that the nefesh had choice. The nefesh had free will. Free will existed before eating from the tree. The tree just represents this desire for physical gain. Those are the positions of the Abravanel and the Malbim. The Ramban takes an entirely different approach. The Ramban, who lived from 1194 to 1270, Shlomo ben Nachman, as distinct from the Rambam, right? But the Ramban, Hayofa ba'inai ki ha'adam haya osa b'tivo masharoi lasos kefiat holados kasher yasu hashamayim v'chol tzvam. He said, before eating from the tree, man just did what he was supposed to do. He did not have choice. He did not have free will. He was on automatic pilot. However, and as he says, "Ve'ein lohem b'ma'aseim avo sina upri ilon hazeh yamolid haratzon v'chefetz sheyivkru ochlav b'davar u'b'hofo l'tov u'l'ra." They basically like trees, basically like plants. You just did what you were supposed to do. However, when he broke that and ate from the tree, v'hinei acharei ochlo min ha'etz ha'yisa b'yado ha'bechira. So what is he saying? Once eating from the tree, and only once eating from the tree, does he have free choice. Has he moved away from being an automaton, if you will, to something that operates of his own free will. Next, Rabbeinu Bechaya, who lived from 1263 to 1350. In came ba'or eitz hadas ki'ilu amar eitz haratzon. והקדוש ברוך הוא מנעו ממנו לפי שאדם היה מוכרח על מעשיו קודם שחרטו והיה כל פעולותיו שכל גמור כמלאך Hashem. He was like a malach. He was like, what's a malach? A malach is an entity without choice. So man was like an entity without choice. But once he eats from the tree, then choice is born, and he becomes responsible. Now, this raises a very, very serious question. If you don't have free will, as I raised before, then how can you be held, what? Responsible for your actions. How can this be a sin? If you don't have free choice, if you don't have free will, then somehow you're operating as an automaton, and maybe as an automaton somehow you're eating from the tree. I'm not quite sure how, because God told you not to, but maybe you're just acting of the way you're programmed to act. Artificial intelligence, right? The way you're programmed to act. Go ahead.
But if God said to you, do not eat from this tree, you would not eat from the tree.
All right.
As a machine.
As a machine, yes, unless you were programmed somehow to eat from the tree in spite of God telling you not to, right?
Which you don't have choice.
It raises a very serious question. How could he have eaten from the tree if he didn't have choice? And how can he be held culpable See, the Ramban and the Rabbeinu Bechaya seem forced to say this, because if it's a tree of the Eitz Hadas TORAH, they're forced in their minds to say that TORAH and all of that is born, or the choices between them are born when you eat from the tree. But if you're, as you say, if you're being told not to eat from the tree and you are an automatic pilot, you wouldn't eat from the tree. So take a look at one answer that is suggested by Rav Chaim of Volozhin. Suggests that man did indeed possess a degree of free will before eating from the tree of knowledge. Trying to explain the Rambam's position. Before the sin, however, evil remained external to man. To sin, Adam had to make the decision to enter evil consciously, as one might enter fire. In other words, what he's saying is that choice, free will that we know did not pre-exist the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Man had a degree of free choice, but it was the free choice to go into the realm of evil. There was a step that preceded the sin. Right? With me? And therefore, that's how Rav Chaim of Volozhin is explaining the possibility that you could say that man lacks free will before eating from the tree. It's not that he totally lacks free will, but he lacks an element of free will. He has to first decide to enter the realm of evil before choosing to do evil. Right?
So there's
Yeah.
any good?
Now, all of this is very mind-boggling, isn't it? All right? All right, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand what the tree of, and you have on the one hand two commentaries who explain that the tree of knowledge of good and evil represented conspicuous consumption, if you will, the desire for physical gain, and you have two commentaries, and they feel that free will existed before eating from the tree entirely. And two commentaries, among others, and these are representative of other groups of commentaries, two commentaries who are saying, no, free will as we know it is born upon eating from the tree. However, perhaps an element of free will exists before, if you take Rav Chaim of Volozhin's position. Okay, we're going to go to the Rambam now. All right, but I see hands up, so I will take two questions. Yes?
If he doesn't have free choice,
Okay.
what separates him from anything?
All right. So your comment again is that God speaks to man. He does not speak to anyone else until he speaks to the Nachash at the end of the story. Right? At least in the text. And what might distinguish man, on the one hand, those who say he has free will, and those who say he doesn't have free will, then maybe that element of free will that he has. Okay. Now, the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim makes a very, very interesting comment. And the comment, I believe, opens up a world which you were alluding to just a moment ago. The Rambam says that before eating from the tree, man lived in a world, and these are my words, of emes, but he says, these are his words, emes v'sheker. Truth and falsehood. After eating from the tree, he enters the world of good and evil.
Wait, before truth
Before
and
eating-
falsehood and after good and evil?
Before eating from the tree, he is governed, or he lives in the world, by emes v'sheker. Truth and falsehood. After eating from the tree, he is governed, or he has entered the world of good and evil.
What was the sheker? We went through all of creation. What was sheker?
Sheker meaning, okay, this is what you do, this is God. God is telling you everything. Well, to answer your question, what is the difference between emes v'sheker and Ravatov? What's the difference between the two? What's the difference between truth and falsehood and good and evil?
Everything that was created was good.
Absolutely.
Everything that was created was good.
Is established by God. Good and evil is man's perception.
Truth and falsehood is established by God. Another way of saying that is truth and falsehood is objective. Right? Good and evil is subject. Right? What man does, and this ties into what the Nachash says, what does the Nachash say to Chava? God doesn't want you to eat from the tree, because if you eat from the tree, v'yisem kelokim yodei tov v'ra. Because if you eat from the tree, you will what? You will be like God, knowing good and evil. If we take the Rambam one step further, what the Rambam is explaining is that this is really a struggle between objective and subjective truth. Do we believe that there is an objective morality? Or do we believe that morality is subjective? Well, let me ask you a question. All right? If the Eskimos, all right, and I'm not sure that this is absolutely true, but if the Eskimos felt that if a baby was born that could not survive the elements without great tipul, without a lot of work, or an Indian tribe or whatever, Spartans, if they took that child and left it in the forest and they said, let it not be a drain on the community, is that moral or immoral?
Depends on
the society, right? That's the answer. Depends on the society. If the society says it's moral, it's moral.
No, but the Torah.
All right. Where does that take you? All right. Where does that take you? That takes you somewhere. That takes you to a place where, if a Nazi society says that Jews are vermin, right? It's the society that's determining morality and immorality, and if the society determines morality and immorality, then how can you have the Nuremberg laws, and how can you hold them culpable for they followed the rules of their society?
Because they don't want to see.
7 Noahide laws, that's correct.
That they're hiding.
Right? And those 7 Noahide laws determine whether or not a society is moral. Right? According to us. According to us. But what we're saying is that we are pretty much the only tradition that is as tolerant as can be. Because what we believe is there are laws for us, and there are laws for them. And you don't have to be like us to become moral. You can be a chassid umos ha'olam, right? You can be a chassid, a tremendously moral person, and not be Jewish. What is the first thing we say to a convert when a convert wants to become Jewish?
Don't do it.
Why not?
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
Because you will be,
What you actually say
you'll be subjected
is
to.
that you will be, right, the first thing you say is you're going to be subjected to persecution. But what you're also saying is you do not have to do this. It's not something that we require. It's not something that God requires. God doesn't say that everybody has to be Jewish. God says that everybody has to be moral. And what is happening when you eat from the tree? You are trying to make morality subjective. That's the Rambam. What happens when you eat from the tree is you are saying, I want to be the determiner of good and evil. That is what the Nachash says. You'll be like God, the ones to determine good and evil. And that's what the tree represents. What the tree represents is the eternal struggle of man against God's objective morality. The eternal struggle of man trying to say, and does this struggle exist throughout history? It exists in every society, in every era, in every world. And what God is doing is He is planting this tree, and He is making that choice man's. Right? In other words, the choice to enter that world, the struggle to enter that world, it's almost as if it's inevitable. Once you create man with free will, he's going to want to determine on his own what's right and what's wrong. And that represents reaching out for the fruit of the tree. And God says, no, you shouldn't eat from that tree. Because you should live in a world where there is objective morality. You should live in a world where morality has its rules. And you can hold people culpable and societies culpable and Hamas culpable, right? Because there are objective morality. There is this concept of objective morality that exists in the world.
Where does the Nachash get mixing up of
Okay,
those?
so the question is whether we take what the Nachash represents, all right, what does the serpent represent? And there will be those that will say that it's symbolic, right, and that it represents the pull on man to eat from the tree. The Nachash somehow represents this pull. Now, there are those who will take it very literally and say that the Nachash somehow had this knowledge and that the Nachash was a unique being. And there will those who will look at it and say that it's symbolically, that this is what it represents. Now, once we accept the Rambam's approach, what we're talking about is a struggle that begins in Gan Eden but continues throughout history. And the fact that God creates it this way as a test to man is as if God knows it'll happen, correct? God almost wants it to happen, because if it doesn't happen, then man won't be man. Man won't be this creature trying to struggle between objective and subjective morality. So it's almost as if that this has to unfold this way, and that's what someone else said before, that man becomes man, as it were, when he eats from the tree, because man is becoming that creature that wants to define good and evil.
So he wanted them to eat from the tree. Actually.
Whether he wanted them to eat from the tree,
eating from the
or
tree.
he felt the need for them to eat from the tree. We don't understand God's ways, but he knows that it will happen, and he sets it up.
He
It
sets
has
it
to
up.
happen.
So set it up.
Yeah.
I have caused them to reach out.
Well, if he doesn't have free will, that's a question. What causes him to reach out? And that's why the Levajin suggests that you have to say that there's an element of free will, even according to those who say that he didn't have full free will. That's why he's bringing that in, because he's saying you have to say. But what I want us to sort of understand now is that this story changes a bit, doesn't it? It's now not a story about Adam and Chava reaching for a tree. It's the story of Hashem creating a world in which man chooses to struggle against his will. A world in which man chooses to struggle to define good and evil himself in his society, in his world. And God is saying over and over again, no, you will judge your societies by an objective standard. The Nuremberg trials after World War II basically were saying that there is an objective morality, and that you will judge German society by that objective morality. That's a stretch, unless you believe in an objective morality, unless you believe that God creates a world where that morality exists.
Senator Taft was opposed to the trials.
Say again?
Senator Taft from Ohio
Was
opposed to the
Senator
trials.
Taft was, I'm repeating again, that's an interesting historical fact, was opposed to the trials. And one would assume because he felt you can't judge another society by your rules. Yes?
He know what he created, called human being, need a struggle. Without struggle, how you can be healthy human being?
Okay, so again, what you're suggesting is what we're saying as a whole, which is that the struggle had to emerge. It had to emerge.
In the reality.
And that God sets up the situation so that it emerges as a result of man's free choice, because he wants us to recognize that this is the struggle we have. Yes.
This is supposed to be a universal man, okay, rather than a Jewish man. So how is universal man supposed to know what's objective?
Good question. Question is, this is universal man rather than Jewish man. How is he supposed to know that this is objective? What is objective, which is why the Gemara does something very strange. What the Gemara does, when it turn back for a moment to the very first sentence on the pages.
On the first page?
Yeah, on the first page, the second sentence actually. Vayetzav Hashem Elokim al Adam lemor mikol eitz hagan achol tokel u'meitz hadas tovara lo tochal mimenu ki b'yom achalcha mimenu motz tamus. You may certainly eat from all the trees of the garden, but from the tree of garden of good and evil you shall not eat, etc. The Gemara takes these two sentences and says that if you parse out the words, and I'm not going to tell you how because it's a stretch. What emerges from this sentences are 6 of the 7 Noahide laws. What's the 7th that doesn't emerge? Don't eat the limb of a living animal because you're not supposed to eat any animals at this point. So therefore, 6 of the 7 laws apply. What are the 7 laws, by the way? They are the following, and I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget one. All right, they are the following: do not kill or murder. Do not steal. Do not commit avodah zarah. Do not worship idols. Do not blaspheme God. All right, curse God. Do not chas v'shalom curse God. In other words, there has to be a belief in God. Do not practice sexual immorality.
Whatever that is.
Incest, etc., as it's defined by the laws, and the Gemara will discuss that. Those are the 6 negatives. That's 5. Okay, so let me go through them again. Idolatry, blasphemy, don't eat the limb of a living animal, murder, sexual immorality, and stealing. Those are 6 negatives. And there is one positive. What is the one positive? Established courts of law. Right? And there's a debate as to what those courts of law are supposed to rule on. One position is for courts of law to obligate to set the other 6 laws, and one is to really set up courts of law that holds a whole system of justice.
Of morality.
Right. Of morality.
This society's morality.
Okay, those are the 7. So therefore, to answer your question, the Gemara says somehow the Gemara cannot contemplate of a creation of man without a concomitant creation of morality. And therefore, that's why the Gemara says we got to find a way to force 6 of the 7 moral laws into these psukim, because this is the communication that God has with man. So somehow, internally, man is supposed to, as part of his creation, is supposed to know that there is a fundamental morality. It's what we call a conscience. And that's supposed to exist. That would seem to be the rabbinic answer in the Gemara to your question, which is an excellent question.
It's like Solon had a code of laws. I mean, there were laws.
There were laws,
Rabbi.
but pagans, because if they worshipped avodah zarah, if they worshipped idolatry, they were not part of the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach.
But they kept some of them.
They kept some of them. They kept some of them. All right, let's so. All right, what I'm hoping is that this explanation, this concept of the struggle between objective and subjective morality, at least serves as a key enabling us to better understand the story. The story at this point is an eternal struggle, not just Adam and Chava eating from the tree, but an eternal struggle that opens with that act. Now, your question. God then forces them out of the garden. Right? In other words, it says, you are forced out of the garden now, because you've entered the realm of subjective morality. You now have transgressed that law. You now want to be ones, those you're going to struggle to define what's right and wrong. You're not going to just listen to me. And he says it by saying, lest they eat from the Eitz HaChaim. And your question was, God could say, eat from the Eitz HaChaim, but I'm not going to let the Eitz HaChaim give them eternal life. God could control anything. So it seems that there are times when God limits his own control. Right? Where God will say, if I create this Eitz HaChaim, I'm going to abide by its rules. You find this in other places, for example, when Moshe Rabbeinu prays to enter Eretz Yisrael, and the rabbis see God as saying, but I made a neder that you wouldn't. I said it in the words of a neder. I said it in the words of a vow. And I am bound by that which I say. You see it in a much more obvious way in the whole concept of prayer and bracha, where God is giving man the opportunity to intercede and to bend his will. Right? What you're saying is that I'm limiting my power, God says, to the point that I will allow you to intercede and I will allow you to bend my will in a particular direction. So it would seem that the Eitz HaChaim is a powerful example of that limitation of God's own power. All right. Now, I know that we have not solved the mysteries entirely, but I hope that we've given some insight. What I want to do now is give you a taste of what's to come, because we're not going to leave the story behind. There is another element to this story that requires our attention. Take a look at the last page. The last page, on the last page, you have looking ahead. I repeat the sentence within which God commands the commandment not to eat from the tree of knowledge. Vayetzav Hashem Elokim al Adam le'mor, mikol eitz hagan achol tochel, u'me'etz hadas tov hara lo tochal mimenu ki biyom ha'chol mimenu mos tamos. That's the way God says the commandment. Whenever the Torah repeats something, an event or a conversation, the rule is, what are you supposed to do? Compare the two. And if you compare the two, lessons will emerge from that comparison. Take a look at how Chava repeats the prohibition. Vatomer ha'isha el hanochash. And I want to, by the way, I think I'm outnumbered. I'm not blaming Chava. All right?
Thank you.
All right? We're not blaming Chava. Because, by the way, we don't know how she heard of the commandment. Right? God commanded Adam. Chava wasn't created. Now, if you say Chava was part of Adam, then she hears it when God commands Adam. Otherwise, it's a game of telephone. Right? Otherwise, it's God tells Adam, Adam tells Chava. So where the breakdown in communication occurs is not known to us.
Adam's fault.
Right? It could be right. Could be either Adam, Chava, or both. Vatomer ha'isha el hanochash, u'mipri ha'etz asher b'toch hagan amar Elokim lo tochlu mimenu. Vatomer ha'isha el hanochash, mipri ha'etz hagan nochel. We can eat from the tree of the garden, all the trees of the garden. U'mipri ha'etz asher b'toch hagan, but from the tree in the middle of the garden, Amar Elokim lo tochlu mimenu v'lo tigu bo. God said, do not eat from it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. There are a series of differences between those two versions. What I want you to do is think of them so that when we come back next week, we'll have it ready at our fingertips. All right? What are the differences? What are the differences between Chava's rendition of and what we're going to, once we look at the differences between the two, we are going to try to figure out why. Why Chava? Or why Adam? Or why both of them deliberately change God's commandment in the way that they do? What is their motivation? Why do they do so? And that's the next layer in this strange story. All right? Okay, everybody. Thank you very much.